Hi, everyone. My name is Wendy Eaton. I'm the Associate Director of the McCarthy's Venture Mentoring Network, and I'm thrilled to have you join us today for this panel session on the manufacturing mindset for early stage startups. This event is part of a series of events called our Masterclasses in Innovation, Leadership, and Entrepreneurship, hosted by the McCarthy's Venture Mentoring Network, the Alumni Relations Office at Northeastern University, and the Women's Entrepreneurship Initiative. Just a few housekeeping items before we kick things off. This event is being recorded, so please remain on mute so that our panelists can come through free and clear on the recording. And please save any questions by popping them into the chat. We will have 15 to 20 minutes of open Q&A at the end where we'll address any questions that come up. Now, without further ado, I would like to turn the virtual microphone over to Anya Losick of Forge to introduce herself and our wonderful panelists. Over to you, Anya.
Thanks, Wendy. I'm so excited to be here and for this panel on manufacturing and supply chain. So just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Anya Losick. I graduated from the College of Science in 2020, did some work at a state agency, worked for a unicorn startup myself, and now I am Senior Program Manager at Forge, which is a nonprofit based here in Massachusetts that helps startups connect with the regional manufacturing and supply chain. So in my role, I spend most of my time talking to the startups on the phone with CEOs and co-founders and technical leads, really just trying to understand where they're at in their product development process and helping guide them towards best next steps to get their product physically made. So that's me, and I'm excited to introduce the rest of our panelists. So I'll start with Barb Feiner, who is the Director of Northeast Massachusetts, also at Forge.
So hi, everybody, also a Northeastern alum. You probably figured out the pattern there. I have a degree in computer science from before there was electricity, so I'll leave that one with you for a while. And yeah, so I have the Northeast region, and I take the startups in my region and try really hard to find the right suppliers for them. And we also offer some programming content. Now we've actually gone in person for a few of them, where we bring in specialists in things like material selection, which you'll hear some about today, about how to design for manufacturing, certifications, and all the way through to things like IP and getting SBIR grants. So we run a bunch of programs again at our facilities, as well as we have a whole lot of hour-long programs that are really great tidbits of help from us throughout the month at all of our locations. So hopefully we'll have a good session today.
Thanks, Barb. And I'll turn it over to Jordan Erskine, who is co-founder and principal at Dynamic Blending, as well as CEO of NarcX.
Yeah, hello, everybody. My name is Jordan. I am a Northeastern alumni through an online MBA that I did from 2011 to 2013. I actually flew to China and met my class from the Boston area and Northeastern out there. So that was a really cool experience. Yeah, so I started a contract manufacturing company that manufactures skincare, cosmetics, OTC products for third-party brands, and we've grown about 12,500% in the last 5 years. So we're rapidly growing. NarcX is a separate company that's unrelated to the cosmetic space, but you can check me out later on that company. Happy to be here.
Awesome. And last but not least, we have Michael Siegel, who is founder and COO at Boston Materials.
Thanks, Anya. Hi, guys. Good to see you guys. So I'm Michael. As Anya said, CEO and co-founder of Boston Materials. I graduated in 2016, mechanical engineering from Northeastern. So go Huskies. Actually, the company started from a capstone project in 2016. Which is pretty cool. So Boston Materials, we're a high performance materials company. So we design, develop, and manufacture material solutions to help customers break through a lot of the design trade-offs that they have when producing different products. And everything we make is powered by a proprietary technology that essentially upcycles carbon fiber waste. And so we're able to kind of improve mechanical, electrical, and thermal properties for customers' products. We kind of spun out, as I said, from Northeastern, and have gone from kind of making small samples in 2016 to 6 years later, 36,000 square foot facility in Billerica with a team of 20, where we're able to, on a full industrial scale, produce our material continuously. So excited to be here to share our kind of experiences, and hopefully you guys find it interesting.
Awesome. So yeah, we have a great group of panelists. They're all coming with really interesting perspectives. We've got the startup support perspective, the startup perspective, the contract manufacturing perspective. So really looking forward to getting into the discussion today. And I think, we can just jump right in with the fundamentals. So I think a lot of companies that are looking to make something physical, the first step is really getting your product from an idea into a CAD file and then into physical existence. So one term that gets thrown around a lot in this space is DFM. And don't worry if you haven't heard of it, it stands for Design for Manufacturing. So I just wanted to start there and see if the panel could kind of speak to what this is, why it's an important initial step, and any maybe lessons or learnings you've had when it comes to design for manufacturing.
Sure, I'm happy to keep it short, but go first. So what it means is if you don't know what you're trying to build and what the requirements are in your market for what you're trying to build, then you're probably not going to get there in a very efficient, effective, or cost-effective manner, right? So the whole idea with the design for manufacturing and design for assembly, and they are many times interconnected, is how to build a product so that there isn't extra waste, extra cost, extra complexity, and that can go all the way through to assembling a product, servicing a product, and that it actually is made in a way that your market will desire it. If it's a very high-end product, then maybe the materials do need to be special. But that whole process is about that and having all of your ducks lined up before you start.
Awesome. Thanks, Barb. Jordan or Michael, do you want to add anything there?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. I think Barb hit on most of the points there. I would put a special emphasis on kind of designing something that can be manufactured, right? I think there's a lot of really cool products that you can design, the engineers can design in CAD and build out prototypes, but it's a whole different story when you actually go to manufacture them. And I think a mistake that a lot of companies might make, even kind of bigger ones, is not having that fully closed loop between the team that's designing and engineering the products to who's actually producing them. And that's actually something that we've really focused from even an organizational level to make sure that anything we're from ground up, from day one, anything we're designing, we include the manufacturing team and their input, just to make sure that there's no breakdown once it actually goes to full scale manufacturing.
Yeah, the comment I had on that was related to, the design for manufacturing is important in, cosmetics or that space, because like think of a customer that comes to you that wants like a luxury fragrance with 18 different bells and whistles on it, right? And so you have to sit there and build out your supply chain and price model for 18 different pieces that might come from 18 different factories or something like that, right? And so designing up front and figuring and planning is important because it'll keep you straight and on track, right? So that you don't get all squirrely and then wonder why your price is, 150% higher than what you originally thought it was going to be, because then that will throw a wrench into here. So it's very, very important. And then the other thing I'll say just real quick is if you get into more technical products like drug products with the FDA, they have what's called a design history file that is a mandatory regulatory requirement. And that, will detail out how you got to design your medical device from the idea, step one concept, all the way through creation. Because a lot of the time, if there's, an issue with the medical device or something like that on the regulatory side, you can go back and you can trace, that traceability through, how your product got to a defect, and it's really important, so there's multiple layers of why that design for manufacturing or to that design step is important.
Awesome. And we will definitely dig into the regulatory elements a little more later on in the conversation. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. And kind of on that note, you touched on the fact that there might be lots of different, sectors, lots of different types of products in attendance today. So if you're comfortable sharing, I'd love to know in the chat, what your company is, what you're working on, just so the panelists can have a little more of an idea as well. So kind of diving a little more into manufacturing and the different processes that you can consider. There's really two sides of the coin. There's in-house manufacturing, and then there's outsourcing to a contract manufacturing company. So I know folks on this panel have experience with both of these, so I'm hoping we can kind of talk about the considerations and things to know. So when it comes to in-house manufacturing, what are some of the advantages and what are some of the pitfalls to be aware of? I'm curious if we can maybe start with Michael, because I know that's something your company does.
Sure. Yeah, appreciate it. So I think just starting with maybe the advantages, the big ones for us, and this actually was one of the reasons kind of we chose to go in this direction. First of all, is IP. If it's the case that you have IP in your process of manufacturing, that's a really hard line to toe when you're working with subcontractors, where you might have to bring IP into their zone. Now you of course have all the legal work, right, and NDAs and all of that, but at the end of the day, you don't know what's behind closed doors. So if they do take some part of your technology, it will be hard to see it. I think the other really big advantages of bringing it in-house is having full control of the process and the product development, especially for an early stage company. The cycle and the speed at which you can iterate is vital for how fast you scale, right? And if you outsource that piece and you have to rely on another company for every cycle of iteration with a customer, it just extends that lead time a lot. And then of course you have kind of quality control. Lead times are obviously benefits as well. And then just to quickly touch on disadvantages, I think the big one obviously is high CapEx. So that's really high cost of equipment. That can range based on the industry. And then of course there's the opportunity cost, right? So you're going to be investing, especially as you scale your company, you're going to be investing your time in different areas. And if you're investing your time and your money into manufacturing, that same time and money can be invested into engineering. And so you just have to make sure that it's really the right choice for the kind of company that you want to be. And then obviously, I think the last one for us is that you think that the costs for manufacturing in-house, you have the benefit of lower costs because you're bringing that ability in-house. But actually, when you're starting up, you have a ton of inefficiencies in your process. You haven't perfected it. You haven't gotten it to scale. And so your cost in the beginning is much higher than if you went and worked with a company that specializes in manufacturing. That's all they do and have perfected their process, right? So I think there's definitely a lot to consider on both sides of the coin, and it really, really depends on the kind of company that you're trying to become and how vital the manufacturing piece is for you.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really glad that you touched on that high upfront cost element, because I think that's a huge barrier to some companies for pursuing this route. And I'm curious if Barb or Jordan, you want to add anything on that side of things?
Yeah, I'll just do a quick thing. Michael covered this extremely well, so very even-handed, even though you've chosen one way. I think some of the choices come down to how new the science / technology / invention / whatever. If it's something that's really revolutionary, then the iterations have to come really fast to even potentially get to the place where your product can be accepted in the market, right? And so holding that really close to you, if you can possibly do it, again, with the downside being capital equipment costs, can be really good, or at least for part of the process. But I think it's obvious that capital equipment costs a lot. So if it's something that someone else just does as part of their normal business and they're really good at it, why become an expert in that? That means you're gonna have to hire a whole bunch of extra people. And by the way, one of the companies I was with, it's back in the days when surface mount technology, which is kind of those little teeny chips on computer boards, were kind of still sort of new and all that. And our company decided to bring in their own equipment, and it's what drove us out of business. We ended up having to have a third shift that we were trying to subcontract, and there were all sorts of things with that because it was very, very expensive equipment. So lessons learned on that one.
Actually, just to jump in really quick, Barbie, I think you have a really good point there that to be clear, we don't manufacture everything, right? We actually source a lot of material and we subcontract out, to Barb's point, the things that we're not good at, the things that there's a lot of expertise out there and there's not something we want to replicate, but our very core technology that we're experts in, that's really what we chose to manufacture. So that's a super important point, Barb.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, in my realm, manufacturing cosmetics and developing skincare formulas and emulsions and stuff like that, like Michael and Barb touched on, it's a lot more cost effective for brands to go out and hire a contract manufacturer than to hire that expertise in-house and then build out, mixing tanks and filling equipment and everything like that, So I think it depends on the industry because, in cosmetics and dietary and food, even you can argue that not a lot in terms of like innovation or IP has been created in terms of like versus like a technology industry or something like that, right? So it's safer kind of to have, strict agreements with contract manufacturers that are making your lotion because, you're not going to go out and hire all these PhDs and masters cosmetic chemists because, that's going to be very, very expensive on your bottom line. And the second point I was going to touch on, which Michael touched on as well, is a lot of people get the cost accounting wrong when they're doing it in-house. We run into this all the time where, like, say you have a jar of cream you want to sell for $29.99 retail, right? And you come to, a company like Dynamic Blending and you're like, well, we were making this at, 57 cents out the door in-house, and we need you guys to match that same price, and we need to order, 25,000. And you're like, well, you start working backwards, and just the material cost alone might be 57 or 56 cents. And so you're like, well, where's your labor and where's your secondary packaging and where's your shipping? And a lot of people don't even layer that in when they're doing it themselves. So that's a very, very important part to like keep track of when you're a brand or you're a brand owner or something like that, is obviously the finance part and making sure that you're capturing those costs, because a lot of the time you just think that, oh, because my team's doing it, I don't have to add that in. And look, we're making 150% margin, on this product. So that's just another point.
Awesome. That's really great insight from everyone, and sort of a great segue into the next question that I wanted to ask, which is, when it comes to choosing to outsource and all right, you've decided that you're not the expert, you want to work with a contract manufacturer, it's really important to establish a positive relationship with that entity. Of course, you're putting a ton of trust in them, you're putting your lead times in them, you're essentially putting your product in their hands to an extent. And so what recommendations do you have for how startups should prepare to work with an external contract manufacturer and also work on building a strong and trusting relationship there? So I know we kind of have both sides of the coin. We have the startups that are contracting out, and we also have, a contract manufacturer that works with companies. So curious to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah, I can go first. So what we like to see, because we do offer very low minimums, but it's the startup brands and the mom and pops that obviously take a lot of your resources, right? Because you have to do more of the hand holding. You're walking them through, in my case, I'm not sure about Michael's case and their manufacturing, but we have multiple layers of regulation. So it's a very complex process to get someone's product just from like an R&D idea to a package with stability and make sure it's safe for the market and the consumer. And so what we like to see is when the startups or the mom and pops have their, design for manufacturing stuff together, because then we know that they've actually done their homework. They don't just come to us with the idea and say, you guys do everything. And then, we price them out 30 times and then they don't end up going with the price. And then 4 months later, they want to be priced again. So again, it's just sucking those resources out of you. So the more, knowing that you are a startup and you're going to have to like fight your way to the top, in the bigger pond with the bigger fish, there are manufacturers that will deal with you if you have your stuff together. But you got to have your stuff together and prove that, hey, this is my brand, this is my plan going forward and everything like that. So
Yeah, I think we've been that startup that Jordan's describing, where at first, we were completely scrambled, didn't have all of our ducks in a row. So I couldn't agree more with that kind of sentiment. It's just be prepared, right? You're an expert in what you guys know. They're an expert in what they know, and so you kind of make sure you come with all of your kind of clear requirements. Be concise. Don't use a ton of their time. Really respect their time. But one big thing I think that's important is really sell the big idea, right? To Jordan's point, you're small fish in a big pond, and they have much bigger customers most likely, and so you really have to kind of get an internal champion. You want them to really believe in you and the fact that you're going to scale and your forecasts. And then at the end of the day, you're asking them to kind of invest their time in you. So be prepared, be concise, sell the golden, sell the dream, and just work with them, as much as you can.
So great answers. I'm going to add just a couple of other dimensions. One, come to Forge. We'll help you find the right. And by the way, we're a nonprofit, so I get to say that, right? The only other point I wanted to make is that we have found, and I found this in my life, if you can find a manufacturer, contractor, supply chain person, whatever, physically as close to you as possible. This goes back to kind of what Michael was saying. In the beginning, you don't know what you don't know. And so being able to pop in and sit down and physical products, touching, feeling, looking, smelling, God knows what, really matters. And sitting down across the table and again, being honest, saying to the supplier, I don't know about this. Can you explain the options, and the impacts of these is really nice. And that face-to-face thing works really well. I'll just sort of throw out there that most manufacturers are probably close to 50 for their major team, and that face-to-face is the dynamic that works for them. So there's pluses for you because you get to see your baby, and then also, form relationships with them.
Awesome. Michael, did you want to add something else there?
No, just I love the sentiment of you don't know what you don't know. I actually had it literally written in my notes. It's so vital. It's just like being self-aware, right? To understand what you don't know and where you can learn. It's like couldn't agree more, Barb.
Totally. Yeah. And I really want to emphasize this concept that you might not always be the most compelling customer to a contract manufacturer on paper. And that's not because your idea isn't amazing. That's not because your team isn't amazing. It's really just because you were entering a space that you might not know everything about. And so we touched a little bit on some sort of techniques to get your supplier to really invest in you, to see your vision. Michael touched on really being able to sell that dream, and Jordan really touched on coming prepared. But I was curious if there's anything else that the panel wanted to add just to really make sure that you can make yourself the best possible customer for a contract manufacturer. And if we touched on everything, we can go ahead and move on, but just wanted to make that space in case there's any other tidbits.
Yeah, just one other note I think is important to bring up that you can show more of a trust relationship, like you're saying, with these manufacturers. Is most manufacturers, I would be surprised to find one that wouldn't entertain like a multi-year agreement, especially knowing like if your plan in the agreement detailed out, like let's say your company goes bananas and you want to make sure that the manufacturer can scale with you, you can have language in those agreements. But as us, like, for dynamic blending, we would love that agreement because we want little brands that then would blow up and, start selling into Ulta and Sephora and stuff like that, especially if we started when they're very, very small and they have to manufacture with us for 3, 4, 5 years. You know what I mean? So there's those key things that would kind of prove to the manufacturer that you're serious and you're just as much, on their team as they are on your team and stuff like that. So
the last thing I'll add, that was really good, Jordan. The last thing I'll add is communication. That's probably life 101 in business. Not only can you not predict everything that you want, that your customers want, that's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. But guess what? We're in a even more topsy-turvy world with supply chain challenges. You can't pick up paper without seeing some of these. And most of the contractors, not most, but 90% of contractors are small businesses themselves, right? So they probably have under 50 employees if you're not dealing with big kahunas. And so they can't stock critical parts. They really can't. They're not going to predict what their customers are going to need. So this is creating lots of stress for everybody. So two parts of that: communicate really well. As Jordan said, there's the trust thing, but also I'll add plan ahead, because it's never even going to go close to the way you want it. And you have to give yourself a lot of extra time, or you're going to be drinking really heavily at night because you're going to be so stressed out. So try really hard to factor those in.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think just the last thing that I would add here is to think about your relationship with your contract manufacturer, just like any other business relationship. So think about, your dynamic. That can actually be something that you weigh in your decision-making process. It doesn't have to just be, their capabilities and their lead times. It can be, do I get along with this person? Do I want to spend a lot of time talking to them? And Forge actually has some resources maybe we can include in the post-event follow-up about kind of how to weigh those factors against each other. But Barb mentioned sort of the elephant in the room here, that obviously we are living in a very volatile supply chain environment, unlike anything we've ever seen before. So I think anyone, working on a physical product has probably felt these effects in some capacity. So I want to spend some time unpacking this a little bit. So kind of starting with where you have personally seen the biggest impact on your supply chain. And if you have seen any, techniques be especially successful when it comes to remedying these issues, or even just getting ahead of them before they start. And I know I'm asking you guys to wave a magic wand. I know it's not that simple, but if you have any advice that you could give on the current situation, that would be awesome.
Where is their impact? Everywhere. To put it super simply, upstream, downstream, materials, packaging, our customers, right? It's just a compounding effect. So it's not a great time when it comes to supply chain. That being said, I think this is where everything we just talked about in the previous question is super, super important, right? Is that you have these existing relationships in place. Like Jordan said, you might have contracts in place, or you might have just a good relationship with the vendor. You've been working them for a bit, and this is where you have to kind of lean on them and as Barb said, communication, right? I think what's super important is you got to keep in mind that it's a supply chain, right? So it chains down. So if you can be very clear on your forecast and your needs, it helps them plan for that. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that's kind of caused all of this, is that you have a complete mismatch in demand and supply. And so if everyone kind of, tells their manufacturers, oh, I need this by, a month from now, when they actually just need it in 2 weeks, to give themselves padding, which in regular scenarios makes sense. But now it's kind of coming down to really try to be as honest and really work with them as much as possible to try to get your stock levels, whatever you need to work well. And just as an example, like a lot of our products, usually a 4 to 6 week lead time, we're seeing easily 12, 16 week, 18 weeks. Not to mention equipment is, 6 months to a year, which is usually 3 months to 6 months. So it's gotten pretty bad. No magic wand fixes, like you said, Anya, but just kind of relationships, really.
Okay, I can weigh in a little to add to Michael. So, good design practices have always been don't single source parts. Now I'm going to say, really, don't single source parts. And if there's this is going to sound horrible, but if there's a circuit that can be designed another way, maybe on the back burner, have that, this is for electronics and stuff, but, and the same with even, it's hard to get plastic pellets. There's reasons to choose certain types of materials like plastics and polystyrenes and things like that, but maybe look at alternatives that might still work in your application, and that may change the fabrication process for it. So you have to kind of think, what does this mean, and which things can I actually consider, with that? And then just as I'm a scrappy entrepreneur, and I've done things like this before, if you're in an entrepreneurial network with a lot of people, like call them up, and because a lot of times, like with prototyping, you're going to be making 30 of something. And if you're missing, I don't know, an Arduino chip or something, can you call a bunch of buddies and say, can you send me just 2? I'll owe you like a keg of beer. I mean, this is the difference between getting like the prototypes out or whatever, try all methods, but it's really come down to things like that.
Yeah, and what I'll add is obviously, the beauty and cosmetics industry is one of the worst offenders to plastics probably in the entire world. They're right up there. And a lot of that is sourced from China, right? So obviously you can imagine what's been going on the packaging side of things over the last year to, year and a half. So what we've seen though, which is kind of exciting and needed, is more innovation on the, like sustainable packaging side and stuff. That's where a lot of these big brands, your Johnson and Johnsons, your Unilevers, your Procter and Gambles, because they all own like 100 brands underneath them, and they're all pushing for that sustainable packaging, but the technology hasn't really caught up to where it needs to be, for the consumer market. So we're hoping to see a whole bunch of innovation out of this, which hopefully brings that domestic, and stateside as well, which, we're hearing a lot of investments going in, a lot of new companies starting up there. So that's exciting.
That's actually a great way to look at it, right? Is that there's so much gridlock, so many issues, that this is the perfect environment for innovation, whether it's in supply chain, whether it's, second, other materials, that it's packaging. There's just so much opportunity. So not all negatives, right?
Awesome. I love that perspective, to bring a little positive spin on it. And I'll just share a quick anecdote that I always think exemplifies the supply chain situation right now. I was working with a company that was making essentially a drone that could spray foam on buildings and kind of help make that process more efficient. And of course, they're worried about sourcing everything. They're worried about sourcing their bearings, their PCBs, all of these things. And then the demo day comes, and the one thing they can't source was the spray foam itself. So just kind of trying to plan ahead, make sure you have all of your ducks in a row. Don't assume anything is safe, because in this environment, really nothing is safe, unfortunately. And something that the panel started to touch on that I'd like to spend a little more time on is this sort of debate of sourcing internationally versus sourcing domestically, and how that plays into this. So if anyone has stories to share or major lessons learned, I know Barb touched on, the aspect of being able to physically go there and sort of the benefits with that, but curious if there's any other levels you want to add to that part of the conversation.
Chime in here for a quick second. Yeah, I think to Barb's point, we always love, if everything else is equal, we definitely always love local manufacturers. It's when you're able to just go over there, whether it's to strengthen the relationship, grab lunch with the folks that you're connected to, or to see their operation, or, especially when you're small and you just need a small, chip or some small rolls of material, and you're just like, can I come by and just grab a roll? That always helps. But in the whole supply chain mess that we have going on, shipping is just as big of a mess and is a big part of it. So if we're looking at it today, definitely we always prefer domestic, mainly because the lead times and the cost of getting things internationally is absurd right now. It's really tough. And I think it's always nice to try to, bolster the US manufacturing and working with US manufacturers. It's always a big positive for us internally as well. So
I'll just chime in with a few hidden costs, by the way. So we talked again about the, hands-on touching, feeling, and all of that aspects that you can't really do if it's far away. But, for anybody who has something that really, again, is very innovative, where potentially you might even get, patents on it, be careful about IP risk in other countries. And then some of the other hidden costs, besides just maybe errors in communication, are multiplied, is shipping and tariffs. So people forget about those, the costs and the tariffs. Right now, it's also the time frame. So I know when I was designing products, and I did some in Taiwan, they would, overnight 3 or 4 of them on an airplane to us. Even some of that is really expensive to go back and forth to look at them, test them, and then send them back with some of your changes. So complexity, try to keep it closer to home. When you get to the point where you're making a gazillion of them, then, you can rethink your strategy and go for the cost play.
Yeah, and I'll just add that it's such a hard question because it comes with so many trade-offs between, what US consumers are willing to pay for, what the brands are willing to sell for, what the contract manufacturer is willing to manufacture for, that chain trickles down. So, obviously, the luxury goods market is growing, obviously a lot of people spend, $5,000 on Louis Vuitton purses and things like that, and so you kind of look at it that way. If what I do, for example, was 100% full circle domestic supply chain, I mean, people would probably be spending $250 for a normal cream of, eye cream or anti-aging products or something like that. I mean, that's the reality probably. And so, there's that trade-off, and we've built up this low cost model for the maximum profit that I think it's going to be impossible or take decades to switch any sort of that model back to something different, really. So
Last little point I'll add to that actually is just thinking back to when we were just starting, we bootstrapped, so we got some grant funding through the government. And depending on where, if that's a route that you end up going with SBIRs, these different grant programs, there are regulations from DoD, for example, where a lot of what you have to make and everything you source to make whatever it is have to be produced in the US, or they call out if it's produced elsewhere. So when you're looking for funds and that's your main route, make sure that you kind of read the fine print and double check that.
Definitely. And I would also add, if you ever anticipate, having the government or the military as a customer, it's really important to make sure things are produced domestically. Great. So I think sort of switching gears a little bit, this is something that Jordan alluded to pretty early on in our discussion. And when it comes to product development, it's an area that might not seem super glamorous, but it can really make or break you. And it's kind of the legal side of things. So like regulatory compliance and IP. So I want to spend a couple minutes on this. I know we're coming up to the last third here, but just want to talk a little bit about certifications. So there are really, two types of certifications that you'll need to consider in your product development journey. So that's certifications for any manufacturers that you work with, and also for your end product itself. So I know that certifications are so different depending on, what sector, what kind of product you're making. But can the panel sort of help give a general overview of what certifications are most common and sort of how to go about making sure any manufacturers in your network have the certifications you need them to have?
yeah, I'll go first. So, in my realm, it's heavy on the FDA side, right? So FDA manages cosmetics, skincare, personal care, OTC products, which is your fluoride toothpaste, deodorants, acne products, things like that. So for us, we have almost every facility certification that we can possibly have. We have USDA organic. For our organic customers, we have 2 different ISO certifications, which stands for International Standards Organization, which I'm sure we'll get into. They have multiple, probably hundreds of different certifications in many different industries, which is a big one to look out for. And, obviously all the natural product ones. So on the certification side, you have to determine what your brand company wants as a certification, and that might not always be necessarily a regulatory certification, but could be more of like a stamp of approval, right? For some sort of, sustainability coalition or some sort of third-party nonprofit that has audited your company and given you some sort of approval like that, that can help and act as a certification for, so it doesn't have to be necessarily like, regulatory cut and dry, but yeah. So for my industry, we're heavily regulated by, the Food and Drug Administration, that what goes out on the shelves and things like that. So food, dietary as well.
Yeah, we're very lucky in that we don't have I mean, no, I'm not jealous of you, Jordan, in that sense. Dealing with it must be not easy for sure. And kudos to you for being able to navigate that. That's definitely a complicated thing to do. On our side, we don't have to focus as much on the vendor and product certifications. What we look at is our own company certification. So there's things known as like ISO certifications. essentially it looks at your whole process from design to through manufacturing, and quality control, and make sure that you have detailed processes for everything and full control from start to finish. And it's just kind of a mark of a organized kind of firm. It's, I think, rare on the earlier startup side, but as you work with more and more manufacturers or customers, they do start requiring different levels of ISO certifications, at least in our realm. And I'll also add separately, again, on the government work piece, if you do end up working with the government, they rolled out a lot of certifications and requirements for things like security, like web security and your security protocols for your computers and things like that, like NIST and CMMC compliance are a couple that come to mind that, as we work in the digital world, become more and more important. So definitely kind of just, again, make sure you're aware of who your customer is, whether it's, you know, big corporations, whether it's government, and just understand what the requirements are, and give yourself as much time as you can to meet them, because it takes a while to go through it. I'm sure Jordan can attest to that.
Awesome. Barb, did you want to add anything there before we move on? All set. Cool. So the next question, I kind of just want to make sure we talk about other legal frameworks that companies should have in place to engage with manufacturers and get their products made. So obviously, you know, NDAs come to mind. Are there any other documents or agreements that you think startups should keep in mind when they're in this early stage?
Yeah, I think a very, very big one that is often overlooked, that a lot of people don't think is important up front, is a quality agreement. I mean, no matter where you're buying from, you should have some sort of quality agreement that details, you know, exactly what the manufacturer is going to do, you know, what they'll cover if there's a defect or an issue on their end, or, you know, vice versa. Or sometimes it might be that, you know, like in our instance, sometimes maybe we'll get a client that sends us labels for a particular lotion, right? And they fail to tell us that new labels are coming and we should put the new labels on those lotions, right? So all of our quality specs are built with these old labels. We put the old labels on the bottle because that's what all of our spec is. And then all of a sudden, right, we have new labels. So that's really, really important to you know, to get right, is that quality agreement. The other side is a manufacturing agreement, right? And that can detail out stuff like I was talking about earlier. It could detail out how many years you want to manufacture with them. It's going to detail how many units you can commit to. If you're to that point, then the manufacturer likes that, right? Even if you can just commit to 10,000 units a business quarter, like you're forecasting, like Michael said, most businesses would love that because that's a lot more than they normally get. So that's another important agreement. And then, you know, like you said, the NDA, I mean, NDA is such a very basic one that should be like the very first agreement that you sign, that I've seen even recently people have failed to sign, and it's end up costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars, you know, in damages. And so it still is very important. Sounds simple, but those documents, you know, we try to get in front very early so that later down the road, you don't have any issues.
So I'll sort of juxtapose that a little bit, Jordan, which is most bona fide contract manufacturers are not in the business of trying to steal your IP. It's just not what they do. They'd never be in business after dealing with so many companies with so many innovations. However, you do really still want to have an NDA, and most of them may have their own, and it may just be simple for you to use theirs. But, you know, don't worry about it after you sign it, because you are going to be getting into really nitty gritty details. So you really have to feel like you're going to trust somebody. The only other document I wanted to bring to mind, though, to make this flow better is, I get to say this as a marketing person, I love putting this into discussion about manufacturing, which is you really need to know what your market requirements are, right? And that feeds into, you know, quality and longevity and repairability and God knows what. And so one of the documents that I very often see missing when documents are provided to a contract manufacturer are ones that kind of state all of that. And that's going to decide a lot of trade-offs, you know, in the product, and there will be trade-offs that you have to make.
Yeah, I think Jordan and Barbara, I think you guys hit all the key ones. And just to maybe touch on the last one I think Jordan mentioned was just this the manufacturer's agreement. Also have kind of the flip side of that, of the supplier's agreement. So depending on if you're manufacturing for your customers, the supply agreement that they would work with you on, to make sure that that kind of jives well with your setup, whether it's the lead times, the schedule forecasting from their end to make sure you can meet all of the deadlines, and all the quality, if there's quality metrics, things like that, you want to make sure you capture all of those. But I think that's, the rest of them, I think you guys covered pretty well.
Awesome. Well, I know we're coming up on time here. I want to make sure that the audience has a chance to ask their questions. So encourage everyone to type up any questions they have in the chat. And maybe while you guys are thinking, we can just go around and do one quick, like 1 sentence key takeaway you would leave all founders with while everyone's thinking of their questions.
I can go first if you'd like. Yeah, mine's pretty simple. Exactly what we've been talking about is just plan, create that design and plan as far out as you can and be realistic. You have to understand these days that the manufacturers and the suppliers, for the most part, a lot of them are still using, COVID and excuses and things like that to hamper their, output. But for the most part, they do care and want to see that stuff. So, that's all I'll say on that.
I'll kind of steal Barb's line of, know what you know and know what you don't know. That's leave your ego at the door. Like, honestly, that you're going to lean on your network a lot. You're going to make a lot of relationships. And the best thing you can do is just be genuine. Show them that you're interested in learning, and those will make for the best relationships, because folks love to invest, teach and show especially younger entrepreneurs what they know, as long as you're, genuine, you're really interested in learning. So, yeah.
I got nothing to add to that. That was great, guys.
Awesome. So I'll hand it over to Wendy to help facilitate the Q&A section.
Thank you, Anya. And thank you, panelists. So far, it's been such an incredible discussion. We do have one question in the chat from Daniel. So I'm going to read it out to you guys and anyone can hop in. For someone earlier on looking to evaluate COGS, C-O-G-S, any recommended ways to dig into getting a feel for cost outside of materials / components, say for controller / interface for a sensor system? Any initial thoughts from the panel?
So there are a lot of suppliers. I look at things like DigiKey and some of these other suppliers for mechanical or electronic parts. You can usually get, quantity low pricing, which of course is going to be like your worst case. And I always say, when you're looking to design something, find something in the world that is somewhat comparable. I don't mean competitive, but kind of has like a lot of the same stuff you've got in yours, and kind of take it apart and then try to find the prices for those. And that, might give you an idea. When you get to the point where you've got your spec and you're working with these, contract manufacturers, contract design firms, they will help you with it. And the part that's hard to spec ahead of time with realistic numbers is, things like the packaging, the plastics on the outside, and the connector things and stuff like that. It's really hard to get that in the beginning. But for the other costs of goods, is you're going to have hopefully full financials that say what your hiring plan is and how many people you need to get it to the point where you can, bounce it over to a contract manufacturer. And that's kind of your overhead. And so kind of plan that into, I think it was Jordan that said that before, which is, that's part of your cost is your people. Don't forget that. And so that will kind of give you an idea of what you're going to have to cover. And yes, your costs will go down with volume on a physical product. I don't know any that haven't, probably exceptions, but I don't know them. But you have to factor in the people, the equipment, the facilities. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I think just to add on there. So For materials and components might seem obvious, but just pick up the phone, make a call the vendors. It's a lot of the time easier and quicker response than waiting for emails to go back and forth. So for the sensor, if you're talking about actual parts, call DigiKey, like Barb mentioned, right? Talk to a sales rep, see if you can get some numbers, or have them kind of run you through a few different parts. And then in terms of kind of other costs, definitely labor is a big one, where you kind of just take it step by step. How much are you paying an operator or controller? How much time are they spending on each task? You run it through. And then I think some big ones that might be missed sometimes, scrap rate. So if you are manufacturing, you're not going to be getting you won't be getting 100% quality, right? So you're going to put in 10 pieces into your machine and you'll get 8 pieces out that are good. So you have to account for that scrap that you're getting of 2 pieces missing, right? Or not good quality. Also electricity, water, sewage. I mean, it's anything that really rent is a important fixed cost to include. So I think there's a lot of resources online to really dive into deep cogs. It can be fun.
Jordan, anything to add there?
No, Michael pretty much hit it. I mean, cogs, you can get really deep. We layer in like SG&A and different categories for labor and freight and everything like that. So this is why, for any manufacturer that's manufacturing piece parts, it's very important to have a good cost accountant, for most manufacturing industries. So
Actually,
if you don't
Jordan,
have,
you just spawned another idea about cost of shipping the goods someplace, right? Or any
Yeah.
actual boxes and stuff that might go, not the product packaging, fancy stuff or whatever, but
yeah,
yeah.
shippers, yep, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you. Anya has a question.
Another question. I don't want to take up the space if anyone in the audience has questions, so feel free to jump in. But one sort of concept that we didn't get to touch on that I think could be interesting is, Michael, you mentioned this was a capstone project. So do you have any lessons learned or anything you can say about spinning out of a university, like from an IP standpoint, in case there are any other students or faculty or anyone that might be entangled in that in the audience?
Sure, yeah. So we had a really positive experience. So from an IP perspective, I think the first thing we did before even naming the company or starting the company is get a letter from Northeastern just releasing the IP to us. We were super lucky in that our specific capstone fell under a branch where Northeastern was able to release it to us, and so all of the IP is owned by us. And I'll say the flip side, that's not necessarily there's positives for sharing IP with Northeastern as well. I know a company that has spun out that shares IP with Northeastern, and they get a lot of benefits, right? There's Northeastern being invested in your company is a very big positive at the end of the day. So I will say there's pluses and minuses to both situations. And I would say just honestly, lean on network, lean on your mentors, anyone that's willing to help, especially Northeastern professors, other students you meet. If I trace back to most of our kind of key vendors, our lawyers, accountants, it's all through a network that started at Northeastern. So just, yeah, seems obvious, but network as much as you can.
So having had a stint at the Center for Research Innovation at Northeastern myself, which is the technology licensing office of Northeastern. I don't know if anyone on the call is a current student, but if you're a current student, Northeastern not only won't take your IP, they won't help you get patents and stuff. That's just not what they do. If you're a student, the IP is yours. It's when you start using research labs and equipment, typically you're postdoc research or whatever, and you're probably using some of the other postdoc researcher professor types and all of that too. That's when it's on the line of it being a Northeastern property, which they have, of course, the right to not take, but very often they do. And as Michael said, but they're paying the average of $25,000 to try to get you through the IP process for you. plus the marketing and everything else, all of the other great stuff. So it's a double, sided equation, but just thought I'd throw it out there. And remember, CRI, Northeastern CRI, and the folks there are very friendly and helpful if you are still within the university and a researcher and all of that.
Thanks for calling that out, Barb. Definitely a great resource, the Center for Research Innovation at Northeastern. We have no other questions in the chat, so I want to go ahead and thank all of our wonderful panelists for all of the great expertise, thoughts, feedback today. I know I learned a lot, so thank you all so much for being here. And stay tuned for additional panel events. Anyone that's on the call will have future events as well that you can sign up for through our Miles series. But thank you to our panelists and have a great night. Thank you all so
Thanks,
much.
everyone. Thanks, Anya. Thanks, Wendy.
Thanks, everybody.